This is the Big O Show. This is the Big O Show.
Happy Wednesday, everybody. Time for Inside the Paint as we have the Heat coming up with a game against the Golden State Warriors tonight at home. And it is a bounce-back game and one that Ira, I think if you're a Heat fan, and I'm just going to start this and be completely honest, that game bugged me the other night. And it was one of those games that, and it's for a variety of reasons, but it reminded me too much of last year's loss against the Hawks in Atlanta when Trae Young didn't play, Clint Capella didn't play. It was a game that ultimately ended up costing Miami the division. It decided who they ended up playing in the first round of the playoffs. Now, this year's Heat team, they still have that two-game cushion. They're still okay when it comes to that one seed. But it was another game that could potentially swing your seeding and who you play, that you should have had that professional mindset going out there, take care of business, and they just didn't do it, Ira. And they did it in a way where you were getting, at one point, you were losing the second chance points battle 11-1 against a team that was the worst offensive rebounding team in the league heading into the game. What does that tell me? That's effort. You went out there and you didn't have the mindset that you needed to against a team that you should have beaten. And it was so, Ira, I think I don't want to be the, hey, let's sway with the breeze and sway too far one direction because of one game, because that's not the way the season works. That game bothered me, perhaps more than any game this season, and maybe as much as any game since that Atlanta game last year.
Yeah, I think one of the worst condemnations you can make of a team is they've lost interest. And I just think the Heat are at the point now, after this marathon season and after 72 games and after injuries and changing lineups, they just want to get to the playoffs. And that's a dangerous approach, Clay, because if you're not sharpened and you're not honed at the right time, it all goes away. Yes, there will be a 1 week break, or at least 6 days. April 10th, final game of the regular season. Playoffs don't start until, for some teams, on April 16th. You'll get that exhale. But the Heat look like a team who just want to do enough. That you have a chance to step on someone's throat on Monday without Joel Embiid, without James Harden, and you don't. Instead, you recalibrate and you say, okay, we just only need to play at 70% effort level, 70% interest level to beat this team. You get burned when that happens. And that's why tonight's the perfect follow-up. You have a Golden State team that has lost 3 in a row, that was horrifically bad last night in Orlando, that might sit Draymond Green, that might sit Klay Thompson, that no matter what, without Steph Curry, will come in shorthanded. Do the Heat have the right mindset to go out and crush and to just absolutely pummel at the start? I'm not so sure they do. I'm not so sure, Clay, this isn't a team that's protecting Jimmy Butler's ankle, that might play it safe with some of the injured players. Tyler Hero, terrible game in Philadelphia. Might they rest his sore knee? So I just don't know when go time for this team is going to be, because it sure as heck wasn't Monday in Philadelphia.
All right, Jonesy gets us going right now in the chat. He says the Heat are done. And I'm not ready to go that far. I mean, but what I will say, and we're going to get through these topics as the day goes on, it wasn't just the mindset on Monday night that bothered me. It was something that we can kind of see. And Sean, I know you've got some of these graphics, so let's go ahead and get rolling with this. There was something in that game that I noticed a couple of years ago, and it's something that it could potentially be a fatal flaw in my mind. So I'm going to bounce this off of you. Was the defense that we saw from Tyler Hero down the stretch a fatal flaw? And you combine that with Duncan Robinson. You have two players who, what you're hoping for out of them is that their offense outweighs how poorly they play on the defensive end. But we saw in the late fourth quarter of that game, Tyrese Maxey finding Tyler Hero and going at him over. And it wasn't just him. They were finding ways to switch off. And it just seemed like wherever Tyler Hero was, they attacked him. Ira, is this a fatal flaw for this team come playoff time?
Yeah, I'm glad you added that last couple of words there. Those last 3 words, come playoff time. Playoff time is when you strategize for each game at each moment. In the regular season, you got a back-to-back. You can't plan for Team A because all of a sudden you got Team B the next game. You have 4, maybe 5 opponents in the same week. So you don't necessarily play to the opponent's strengths and weaknesses. In the playoffs, you do. In the playoffs, you have a detailed scouting report against player A, B, and C, exactly what you do. And clearly against Tyler Hero, you go on the attack like Tyrese Maxey did, Tobias Harris did to a degree also. And yeah, it is. And it could be covered that if Tyler Hero is going to give up 15 fourth quarter points, but gives you 18 fourth quarter points, that's fine. Tyler Hero was the worst Heat player on the floor, minus 15 in that loss to Philadelphia. He was a net negative for you. I think the Heat's perfect closing lineup, like we were talking to Big O in the crosstalk, would be you get someone who could both score and play defense, because you do need one more scorer out there in attack mode, especially when Jimmy's been a little bit passive. Kyle's been a little bit passive. Victor Oladipo could be that player. So I'm curious tonight whether Tyler doesn't play because of the knee or whether he's available. Clay, will there be a moment, or should there be a moment in one of these games where Eric Spoelstra says, I know Tyler Hero is the Sixth Man of the Year award winner. I know he's had a great season and he should get paid in the offseason. But I'm going to take Game X, whether it's tonight against the Warriors, Friday night against the Knicks, Saturday against Brooklyn, and I'm going to cast Victor Oladipo in that role. And I'm going to save some of his early game minutes so he doesn't run out of fuel, because I need to see what that looks like. And Clay, I hope he does, because I need to see what that looks like. Could Victor Oladipo, 11 months after quadriceps surgery, have enough in the tank to be a game changer, a sort of moment maker? I think that he needs to experiment. I think they need to see that moment.
And I think to get to the question as far as is it a fatal flaw, you're getting into this dangerous territory where you were last year, where you're almost relying on Victor Oladipo to be that. Whereas at the trade deadline this year, he was the addition that was going to be just that something extra down the stretch and heading into play. I don't like the team being in a spot where they have to rely on him to potentially do that. So now the flip side of that, and you mentioned this in your Ask Ira column, is Gabe Vincent didn't play the other night. And perhaps there are moments in the fourth quarter, maybe even not necessarily in the playoffs, but during the regular season where Tyler Hero is getting beaten over and over again on the defensive end of the floor, and he's not making up for it on the offensive end of the floor. Maybe Gabe Vincent comes in. When you have a full roster, Oladipo is clearly the obvious option there. But if he can't play, maybe it's a Caleb Martin. But you don't like that your best offensive player, and I'm fully on board right now saying that Tyler Hero is Miami's best scorer. You don't like that you can't necessarily play him down the stretch unless he is absolutely cooking on offense. And so, Ira, to me, that's the thing where it's like, it reminds me too much of the Indiana Pacers series a couple of years ago. And look, they swept the Pacers, right? So it's not that fatal flaw may go a bit far when you go to these, hey, you're going to be able to strategize and find ways to mitigate it and all that. But I still have nightmares of Malcolm Brogdon. I mean, he would just look and he'd say, all right, where's 14? I'm going at him. Where's 55? And so to me, that's the concern when you end up going into a playoff series against a Milwaukee. How do you keep Drew Holiday from going, where's 14? You go up against a Brooklyn. How do you keep Kyrie Irving from doing that? You go at Philadelphia and James Harden, Tyrese Maxey again. I mean, you're just going to have to deal with this situation over and over again. And that it bothers me. And it's something where I'm not ready to say it's a fatal flaw in the playoffs, because I want to see how they mitigate it when it comes time to game plan. But it's just something we've seen before. And it's something that certainly can hold this team back.
And then, Clay, I want to go the other way on this. Or could Monday's closing fourth quarter been pure genius by Eric Spoelstra? Just like I mentioned how you want to see Victor Oladipo and what he might be able to do at the end of a game, maybe Eric Spoelstra, and this is a stretch, I know, but maybe Eric Spoelstra wanted that moment to happen. He wants to see, how does Tyler react? Does he go to the video and look at each individual sequence and say, how can I be better? Or he wants Tyler to know he has the confidence in him in those moments, like he said post-game. It's interesting. Eric Spoelstra said post-game how Tyler's been one of our better defenders. Well, no, he hasn't. Anthony Chang mentioned this in his Miami Herald article, how he ranks in the bottom 18th percentile when it comes to individual one-on-one defense this season. But sometimes you create those moments, Pat Riley's been known to do this also, where you not only let a player sink or swim, you let a player drown. And then you want to see what happens the next time he comes up for air. Does Tyler grow from those moments? Does he look at every Maxey play and saying, was I on his hip? Was I in the wrong place? Was my footwork good enough? Was the exchange on the pick and roll handled well enough on the handoff between the other defender? So maybe there's something about that maybe you and I hear when we do our Slomin's home security inside the paint show during the playoffs, where Tyler goes, you know what? That game in Philadelphia on March 21st when I got roasted, I went to school after that. Maybe Eric Spoelstra tells us, ever since Philly, Tyler's been better. There still is time to go to school on that. They will be facing Kyrie Irving, for example, at FTX Arena on Friday night. So there'll be another big-time scorer potentially in that situation also. So again, during the regular season, I have no trouble experimenting. Whether it's Tyler in the fourth quarter Monday, whether it's going 8 big minutes with Victor Oladipo if they need to in the fourth quarter tonight, learn all you need to know. But you can't create fear factor along the way. I think that's what Monday did.
Hey, guys, make sure you hit that like button for us. It does us a big favor. Make sure to tell your friends. We have a blast here every Wednesday morning. Even when they're losing, we try to have some fun. Also, drop your comments in the section, some questions. We'll get to them as the show goes on. Next topic I want to get to, Ira, are Miami Heat veterans breaking down? We mentioned this in the crosstalk, and look, we've got Jimmy Butler with the ankle issue, Victor Oladipo's back spasm. PJ Tucker, it's not that there is a specific injury that is holding him back, but he's not the same player that he was a few weeks ago. I mean, he was a guy who was leading the NBA in three-point percentage. Now he can't buy one, even in crucial times from the corner, which seemed automatic. Kyle Lowry looks okay, and yet he had that long stretch where he was off, so it's almost like his body hasn't gotten to that point where it's broken down yet. So are we getting to a point where the guys who have played extensive minutes throughout the season, are the veterans on this team breaking down? And is that a concern to you?
I think the PJ Tucker thing is something you can't run away from anymore. He has done nothing in recent weeks. He hasn't even made shots when he was sort of your outlet there. Don't know if it's time off or if it's just a matter of you can't put those miles on a 36-year-old and expect for him to be ready in the playoffs. That's a concern. That's why they're taking more of an extended look at Markieff Morris. Not that they have a lot of other options. Maybe we'll see Caleb Martin a little more at the 4 also. But I also think it's sort of like what I mentioned early at the top of the show here today. I'm just not so sure the interest factor is there. Look, Clay, they spent the entire season trying to climb to get number 1. Mission accomplished to get to first place. They spent then the time in first place trying to create a buffer. They've done a pretty good job of that. Even now, 2 games in the loss column, head-to-head tiebreaker advantage because of conference record with the Bucks, still in a good place there. I'm not so sure what they have left is fuel. Again, we'll get into it later in our show because you might wind up playing the Nets, and for all the good of the number 1 seed, there might be some bad that comes with it. So I almost think it's a case of, as much as you mentioned, PJ Tucker's 36, Kyle Lowry's 35, you have Jimmy Butler and Markieff Morris and a bunch of 33-year-olds. I think instead it's what's my motivation. And you and I have spoken for months, and even away from the show for years about how great a coach Eric Spoelstra is. I think that's undeniable. Voted top 15 all time, going to make his way into the Hall of Fame, praised by every visiting coach who comes in. But is there something Eric Spoelstra can do to re-engage this team at this moment? Or, because he knows coaching a hell of a lot better than you and I ever will, is he saying, you know what? A little bit of an exhale here might not be the worst thing. Maybe these guys do need to take a breather. Maybe they need to find a way to get on their own re-energized. But the Heat are in a weird time. They're going to play a Golden State Warriors team again tonight without Steph Curry, maybe without Draymond Green and Klay Thompson. Are they going to have any motivation to say, we're going to do our best to go out there and beat Jordan Poole? Because they didn't do their best to go out there and beat Tyrese Maxey on Monday. It has to come from within. And I don't see a lot right now from within when it comes to the Miami Heat.
I remember talking to Chris Bosh a couple of years ago, and we were talking about the Big Three era. And he made a comment that's always stuck with me. And he said kind of something that you just said. They were basically bored with the regular season by the end, that final year when they were together. And they weren't, he didn't necessarily say this, but they weren't having the fun that they had when they were, doing the Harlem Shake, and it just, things got kind of old.
Yes.
And you're just waiting for the playoffs. That team earned that. That team went to 4 straight NBA finals, won back-to-back championships. My issue, if this is indeed the problem with this team, that they've lost interest, and I think that's certainly a possibility, they haven't earned that. Right? I mean, the players individually have earned that based on what they've done at other sides. PJ Tucker won a championship last year. Kyle Lowry won a championship in Toronto. You have a lot of decorated players on this team. This unit, this group has not earned that. This team, it added Kyle Lowry, it added some pieces in the offseason, PJ Tucker, Markieff Morris, but this is also largely the same group that we saw get swept by Milwaukee last year, that we saw lose in Atlanta last year, a game that ultimately cost you a better seed and forced you to have to play Milwaukee. You would think that this core group would have learned from that. So maybe it's not that the veterans are breaking down. Maybe it is what you're saying, that they've kind of lost interest. To me, Ira, the problem is that this team hasn't earned the right to lose interest, right? And it's like, I know that may not make the most sense because we all sit here, we've said all year that the playoffs are what matter. The regular season games, like it's not going to be the biggest thing with this team. And yet you got to get there. And I'm with you. It's good they've still got that buffer, but Brooklyn is looming. And it feels more and more like getting that 1 seed is going to be more important because I still, even if Kyrie can't play, if they go to Toronto or whatever, I still feel like that's a team that you're going to favor to win that play-in matchup. You got to get that 1 seed. And you have to realize that games like Monday night are vital, and you can't afford to lose interest in those games.
You know, Clay, to me, it always comes down to this, a chip on the shoulder. We know that Kevin Durant has a chip on his shoulder to prove that leaving the Warriors championship dynasty was the right thing. Same thing with Kyrie Irving, moving on from a very competitive Boston team. The Nets have chip on the shoulder. The Sixers have chip on the shoulder because James Harden's got to prove and make it work somewhere, and Joel Embiid has got to take the next step from the process. They have chip on the shoulder. I think the Bucks have chip on the shoulder because you'd never want to be called a one championship wonder. And Giannis knows for as many steps as he's made with MVP and other things, that if you want to get in the pantheon of the LeBrons and the Jordans, that you have to double up on your championship. They have chip on their shoulder. Boston, I think Tatum, and I think where they stand right now with that team and Jaylen Brown, they have chip on their shoulder for being doubted. Chicago, Zach LaVine has his contract extension coming up. I think he has chip on the shoulder. I'm not so sure the Heat do. Kyle Lowry already won his championship and showed that at 35, he can get a 3-year, $85 million contract. PJ Tucker has spent forever trying to get the title. He had his championship last year in Milwaukee. Jimmy Butler got his mass extension, is out selling coffee right now at the Miami Open. I just wonder, where is the chip on the shoulder? I think Bam does. Bam always talks about it. But is that enough for this team? That's why when you're talking about, let's call it the Clay Ferraro inside the paint desperation meter, I'm not so sure the Heat's desperation meter going into the playoffs matches up with other teams. And Clay, to me, that's a real concern.
All right, coming up next on Inside the Paint, we got more to get to, including, is it time for a lineup shakeup? We're going to go to Coach Ira and see how he would handle this. That and a lot more coming up next right here on Inside.
This is the Big O Show. This is the Big O Show.